The world felt heavier than it ever had as I eased myself into the recliner by the living room window. The sunlit curtains swayed gently, but I couldn't enjoy the view. My chest ached where the surgical tape clung to my skin. Each shallow breath was a reminder that my heart had been cut open just days ago. The scent of antiseptic clung to me from the hospital, mingling with the faint perfume of roses from the garden outside, the ones Leonard had planted for me years ago. I had never felt so fragile, so aware of my own mortality. I heard footsteps in the hallway, the soft rhythm of my daughter-in-law, Evelyn, moving about the house. "Evelyn!" I called, my voice trembling with both weakness and the hope for kindness. "Could you please bring me a glass of water?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that carried more weight than silence should. She appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, her face pinched in annoyance. "We're not your servants," she snapped, the words cracking through the air like a whip. The force of them stunned me. My lips parted, but no words came before I could respond. She spun on her heel, muttering something under her breath as she headed toward the kitchen. My eyes stung, but the tears refused to fall. I had asked for water, just water, and was met with contempt as she stormed off. Her phone buzzed and lit up in her hand. For a brief moment, the screen angled toward me. A message appeared in a group chat with a small picture of her best friend's smiling face. "She's so annoying. Hope she doesn't live too long. Then the house is all ours." The words carved a hollow into my chest, deeper than any scalpel had. My throat tightened. I clutched the arm of the recliner, willing my heart to slow down. This wasn't irritation. This was malice. My daughter-in-law wasn't just tired of me. She was waiting for me to disappear, and she wasn't alone in the thought. From the kitchen, I heard the clink of a glass against the faucet. I swallowed the tremor rising in my chest. Somewhere deep inside, past the pain and the betrayal, something colder began to stir. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was the beginning of a quiet resolve that would change everything in the days to come. The clink of the glass on the side table lingered in the room long after Evelyn disappeared. I held it in my trembling hand, the water trembling just as much as my fingers, and let my mind drift back to the years that had led me to this moment. I had been alone for more than 2 decades, ever since Leonard's heart gave out one winter morning while shoveling snow from the driveway. I remembered that day in sharp, merciless fragments, the icy air burning my lungs, the ambulance lights staining the snow red, and the sound of our son Adrian's voice breaking over the phone. He was only 19 then, too young to lose his father, and I vowed that I would protect him from every other pain life could throw his way. I worked double shifts to keep that promise. Days at the library, nights cleaning offices, coming home to an empty kitchen, smelling faintly of Leonard's old coffee tin. Every extra dollar went to Adrian's tuition. Then to his first car when he got his job at the marketing firm. When he told me he wanted a big wedding for Evelyn, I signed the checks without blinking. Seeing his face light up felt like Leonard was still with me, smiling through our son 5 years ago. When the house finally became too quiet, I made the choice I thought was love. I let Adrian and Evelyn move in, rent-free, just until they got back on their feet. They had claimed financial stress, loans, a car accident, a bad investment. I believed them because a mother always wants to believe her child. What they never knew, and what I had buried in my chest like a secret seed, was that this house existed because of Leonard's life insurance. His last gift. He had worked himself to the bone for me, for Adrian, for a home that would always keep us safe. The memory of his voice came back to me, steady and warm as a hand on my shoulder. "Never let anyone treat you like a burden, Scarlett." I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting second, I could feel him there beside me, whispering the reminder I had ignored for too long. By the next morning, I would no longer be able to pretend that ignorance was love. Morning light filtered through the blinds, soft and golden, but it couldn't warm the chill that had settled into my chest. My body ached from the surgery, and every movement felt like wading through wet sand. I heard faint laughter from the kitchen and the clatter of dishes. And for a moment, I let myself hope that today would be different. "Evelyn," I called, my voice raspy. "Could you help me make some tea?" She appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, one eyebrow lifted, as if I'd asked her to build me a cathedral. Then, with a roll of her eyes, she turned back toward the kitchen. Honestly, Scarlett, you make everything harder for us, Adrian muttered from the living room without even looking up from his tablet. His words stung more than hers. I pressed my hands to the arms of my recliner and forced myself to stand. My stitches protested, but I refused to show it. Moving slowly toward the hallway, I passed the small table where I kept my wallet and important papers, a habit I'd had for years so I wouldn't misplace things. My stomach tightened. The drawer was empty. My voice wavered. "Evelyn, my wallet, the house papers, they're gone." She turned with a casual shrug. "I reorganized for you. You'll thank me later." Her tone was sweet enough to mask the venom underneath, but dread pulled in my stomach. They weren't just irritated with me. They were preparing to erase me from my own life, to make my existence here as thin and powerless as a ghost. I limped to the kitchen and gripped the counter for balance. Filling the kettle myself, my hands shook as I spooned loose tea into my favorite porcelain cup, the one Leonard bought for our 25th anniversary. The smell of black tea rose like a memory of comfort I no longer felt. I carried the cup back to my chair, each step measured, and sipped in silence. The warmth did nothing to melt the cold certainty growing inside me. If I wanted to know the truth of their hearts, I would need to stop pleading and start watching. One last quiet test would tell me everything I needed to know. By the afternoon, the bitterness in my chest had hardened into something unmovable. I had spent the morning in silence, sipping my tea and listening to the easy laughter of the two people who now treated me like an unwanted guest. My heart thudded with each thought, each memory of Leonard's voice telling me not to let anyone treat me like a burden. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm but steady. "If you can't respect me," I said, standing in the doorway to the living room, "then you should leave my house." Evelyn's head snapped toward me first, and a sharp laugh escaped her lips. "Your house," she said, mockery dripping from every syllable. "Scarlett, you're confused. You've been on pain meds for days." Adrian didn't even meet my eyes. He rubbed his temple and sighed. "Mom, you're not thinking straight. Just go back to your room and rest before you make this worse." I held my ground, but my knees wobbled. "I am thinking straight. I will not be treated like this in my own home." Evelyn's expression shifted from amusement to irritation in a heartbeat. "Fine," she said flatly. "If you need rest, we'll make sure you get it." Before I could react, Adrian took my arm and guided me down the hall with surprising firmness. My protests caught in my throat as Evelyn followed behind, and in one fluid motion, they ushered me into my bedroom and shut the door. The sound of the lock clicking was soft, almost delicate, but it roared in my ears. A moment later, I heard Evelyn's voice through the door. "It's for your own good." I staggered to the window, my chest tight, and pressed my palm to the glass. Below, my rose garden bloomed in the late afternoon sun, a sea of pink and white. I remembered Leonard kneeling in the dirt, his hands strong and steady as he planted each bush for me. Movement caught my eye. Mrs. Willis, my neighbor, was watering her hydrangeas. Desperation surged through me, and I waved frantically, my hand trembling against the glass. Her head lifted, and our eyes met. In that instant, I felt the first fragile thread of hope pull tight inside me. I pounded the window with the flat of my palm until Mrs. Willis finally saw me. Her eyes widened as she set down her watering can and hurried closer to the fence. I could barely hear my own voice over the thud of my heart. "They locked me in," I cried, my voice cracking from the strain. "Call the police!" She nodded sharply and disappeared into her house. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, my breath fogging the pain as minutes crawled by. My legs trembled, and I sank onto the edge of the bed, straining to hear any sign of help over the muffled hum of the television down the hall. Then the faint wail of a siren reached my ears. Relief flooded me, chased quickly by a tremor of fear. Would they believe me? Through the slats of the blinds, I watched the patrol car pull into the driveway. Evelyn appeared first, all honeyed smiles and feigned surprise, opening the front door with a hand over her heart. I could barely hear the words, but I caught her tone, soft, patient, and dripping with false concern. "My poor mother-in-law," she cooed. "She's been so confused since the surgery. We were just trying to keep her safe." I banged on the window and shouted, "They locked me in!" "I'm not confused." But the officers glanced up at the house and then back to Evelyn, who clutched my phone casually in her hand like it had always been hers. I realized with a cold twist in my stomach that she had hidden the evidence before they arrived. Mrs. Willis lingered on her porch, holding her phone at chest level, pretending to check messages. Only when our eyes met did I realize she was recording. A single thread of hope anchored itself in me. She had seen and she would remember. After a brief conversation, the officers left with polite nods. No report filed, no questions asked. My humiliation burned hotter than any fever. But beneath it, a new steeliness took root. If no one else would protect me in my own home, then I would have to become the storm they never saw coming. When the red tail lights of the patrol car disappeared down the street, the house sank into a tense silence. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the locked door, my heart pounding with the dull ache of betrayal. The walls of my own home felt like they were pressing in. I knew then that waiting for someone else to save me was a mistake I wouldn't make again. I pushed the window open, the old frame groaning in protest. The evening air was cool against my face, carrying the faint sweetness of my rose garden. Swinging one leg over the sill sent a sharp tug through my chest, and when I finally eased myself down, my knee scraped against the brick. Pain flared, but it was nothing compared to the fire in my chest. My slippers landed in the soil Leonard once tilled with his own hands, and for the first time in days, I felt free. I crouched by the garden bench and reached under the loose wooden slat where I'd hidden my spare keys. They were cold and familiar in my palm. Inside the small shed at the side of the house, I unearthed the steel safe box I hadn't touched in years. Its weight was comforting, like holding a piece of my old strength in the dim light. I flipped the latch and lifted the lid. There they were, the property deeds, notarized and untouched, and the letters Leonard had written to me during his final months. His careful handwriting spilled across the paper, reminding me of the man who had trusted me to protect everything we had built. The next morning, I called Charles Lawson, the lawyer who had helped me finalize Leonard's estate. I brought the deeds to his office, my hands shaking, but my voice steady. After reviewing the papers, he looked up with a small, knowing smile. "Scarlett, the house is still legally yours," he said. "And because of the conditional occupancy clause your husband insisted on, any neglect or disrespect toward you triggers reversion. You can reclaim it fully." I exhaled slowly, the weight of helplessness lifting with each breath. They thought I was weak. They had no idea the storm they had just woken. Mrs. Willis welcomed me into her home that evening with a firmness that felt like armor. I spent the night on her floral couch. My body ached, but for the first time in days, my mind felt sharp. Between sips of chamomile tea, we planned my counterattack in quiet. Deliberate steps by morning. The plan was in motion. Mrs. Willis handed me her phone with the video she'd recorded of me waving frantically from the locked window. The image was grainy, but my desperation was undeniable. We took photos of the upstairs window with the latch clearly turned from the outside, proof that I had been confined against my will. And then, with her help, I set my phone to record during a casual conversation with Evelyn the next day. It didn't take long before she muttered under her breath, "She's just dead weight." Hearing those words aloud on playback was like a match striking inside me. I returned to Charles Lawson's office with my small folder of evidence. He reviewed it quietly, his eyes narrowing in satisfaction. "This is more than enough," he said, tapping the table. "We'll prepare a formal 72-hour eviction notice and a gift revocation document. Once they see this, they'll have no ground to stand on." When the papers were ready, I held the envelope in my hands and felt the weight of my own resolve. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. That afternoon, I walked up my own front steps without hesitation. Evelyn opened the door, surprise flickering in her eyes, and Adrian lingered behind her, wary. I didn't raise my voice or tremble. I simply extended the envelope toward them. "What's this?" Evelyn asked, her tone sharp but unsteady. "Your notice," I said calmly. "You have 72 hours to leave my home." The color drained from her face as she took the envelope, and Adrian's hand faltered midair as if he wanted to grab it, but thought better of it. I watched the realization wash over them. They had underestimated me completely. Their silence followed me as I stepped past them into the house. The echo of my footsteps led me to the living room, where the truth of our lives would finally come to light. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she fumbled the envelope open. her face blanching with every line she skimmed. Tears welled in her eyes and her voice cracked. "Scarlett, we can fix this. We didn't mean—" Adrien stepped forward, his tone more pleading than commanding. "Mom, please don't do this. We've just been under a lot of stress. We can change. We can make this work again as a family." I stood in the center of the living room, my hands calm at my sides for the first time. I felt no need to raise my voice. "You should know the truth before you say another word," I said. I walked to the side table and picked up a small digital recorder I had kept in the safe with my documents. With a gentle press, Leonard's voice filled the room, deep and steady, carrying a love that time and death hadn't erased. "Scarlett, promise me, this house will always be safe for you, no matter what happens. It's your sanctuary." The words settled over the room like a verdict. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, and Adrienne's shoulders slumped. "This house," I continued, "was bought with your father's life insurance. Every wall, every window, every rose in the garden outside exists because he worked himself to the bone for this family. And you? You treated his gift like it meant nothing." Evelyn finally crumpled into a chair, her tears spilling freely. "I didn't know," she whispered, shaking her head. "I didn't know it came from him." "That doesn't change what you did," I said quietly. 72 hours? That is my mercy. Use it to pack your things and decide who you want to be when you walk out of this house." They said nothing as I left them in the silence of Leonard's voice, still echoing faintly. A reminder that some promises are not meant to be broken. The house was quieter than it had been in years. For 2 long days, I moved through its rooms like a ghost, watching them pack in silence. Cardboard boxes lined the hall, the smell of tape and dust mixing with the faint scent of roses drifting in from the garden. Adrien carried a small box down the stairs. Pausing at the landing where our old family photos hung, he picked up one of him and Leonard at his high school graduation, his young face beaming with pride. His thumb traced the edge of the frame, and for a moment I thought he might take it with him. But he hesitated, glanced toward the door, and finally set it back on the table without a word. The photo stayed. Evelyn moved mechanically, her face pale and swollen from crying. She didn't speak to me beyond the occasional muttered apology that trailed into nothing. When the last of the boxes were stacked by the front door, she lingered, holding the house keys in her shaking hands for a long moment. She stared at the little silver keychain that read, "Home, sweet home." I watched her chest rise and fall, and then she stepped forward and placed the keys gently on the coffee table. The moving truck rumbled in the driveway, and neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, pretending to fuss with mailboxes and hedges, while their eyes followed every movement. Adrien avoided my gaze as he loaded the final box. Evelyn climbed into the truck beside him. Her shoulders slumped, and the engine roared to life. I stood at the window, my hand resting against the glass, and watched as the truck pulled away, the neighbors' whispers fading with it. There was no triumph in me, only the quiet weight of justice settling over the house like dust after a storm. When the street fell silent again, I turned back into my home, ready to decide what kind of life I would build in the space they had left behind. The morning after, the moving truck disappeared. The house felt both heavier and lighter. The weight of betrayal lingered, but the silence was different. No longer oppressive, but expectant. I walked through each room slowly, my fingers grazing the walls. And for the first time in years, I felt that this home belonged to me again. Instead of letting the emptiness swallow me, I chose to fill it with something new. A week later, I opened the doors of Monroe House, a small home share for widowed women who needed a safe place to recover after surgery or illness. I placed an ad at the community center, and within days, 2 women arrived. Gentle Mrs. Carmichael with her knitting bag and sharp-witted Teresa, who had just come through hip surgery. Together, we rearranged the living room into a warm, common space, filled the kitchen with the scent of simmering soup, and brought laughter back to rooms that had heard too much bitterness. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a sanctuary. One sunny afternoon, I planted a new rose bush in the front yard, the soil cool and rich beneath my gloves. As I pressed the last bit of earth into place, I whispered Leonard's name under my breath, knowing he would have approved. A single new bloom unfurled days later, as if he were smiling from somewhere unseen. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. Mrs. Willis joined us, and my 2 new housemates laughed in the garden, their voices carrying through the soft evening air. The house pulsed with life again, a home reborn from loss and quiet courage. Family doesn't always share your blood. It's the people who never let you feel alone.